What's up, everybody? We are back with the second video in our Requiem series, where we are going to be looking at the fourth movement of the Requiem that I'm currently working on. In the previous video, which if you haven't watched, go back and check it out, we looked at the Introit, the Querite, and the Requiem Eterna, which are sort of this large ternary form. This is going to be a much shorter video. We're just looking at one movement, which I added in. This is not liturgically part of the Requiem Mass, which is all right in this setting because I want to reiterate that this is a secular work, right? We're using the Requiem as a concert work for this. It's not designed to be done in church because if it was, I am an Anglican, so we'd be using the BCP and writing in English. So this is a secular work. So we're going to be looking at a slow vocal fugue. We're dealing with something a bit more contrapuntal than we looked at in the first three movements. This is really supposed to kind of build up tension and foreshadow the Dies Irae, which comes right after this and will appear in the next video of our series. So everything we're looking at here is foreshadowing probably one of the darkest and most traumatic moments in this Requiem. So the piece that we're going to look at here now, we've got a vocal fugue that's kind of doubled, if you will, by the string orchestra. So those entrances are happening. We start low in the basses, which are doubled by the double basses. We build up through the choral parts and through the strings. Without further ado, we'll have a listen to an AI recording of the piece. I've got a comedically large score here with me that we'll go through. We'll have a listen to the AI demo of the piece and then dive into this vocal fugue to talk a bit about what's going on here.
Premum, regnum, Querite, Premum, regnum, Querite, Premum, regnum, Querite,
So that was our AI demo of Premum Regnum Dei Querite. I hope you enjoyed the piece. We're now going to dive into this thing and talk a bit about what's going on. So really, we've got a vocal fugue. We don't have a development section. It's really just like a vocal fugal exposition. And instead of having a development section, we continue to build through it for this kind of climatic moment when the organ comes in. So we're really layering things from the bottom up. We start off here with this bass entry that is doubled in the double bass, right? We're, as I mentioned earlier, we're foreshadowing the darkness, the drama, the intensity that is to come in the Dies Irae that happens right after this movement. And this is going to give us that dark timbre that we're looking for here. So we've got the basses starting out with the subject, the tenors coming in here with the last bar on the page. But for fugal writing like this, one of the things that I like to do, it's a bit of, I guess, a trick of the trade, if you will, is to write my subject and my counter subject together. Right. So what we've got here is we've got this descending chromatic line happening in the bass, right? So we've got our answer in the tenor, descending chromatic line in the bass, and then that's being doubled between the cellos and the double basses down in the string orchestra. I chose to go with this chromatic falling bass as a counter subject, if you will, for a few reasons. It thematically ties back to a lot of the musical ideas that we had in the previous three movements. If you watched the last video on the Introit, Kyrie, and Requiem Eterna, you'd see that I did a fair amount with the descending chromatic, almost ground bass. There's a completely different vibe in that piece, but these sorts of running themes are what helps tie a large work like this together. So I wanted to try to find a way to incorporate that descending chromatic bass line into this movement. A descending chromatic line can sound sad, or sorrowful, if you will, kind of almost like Henry Purcell, Dido and Aeneas, Dido's Lament sort of thing, or it can sound frightening, which is kind of what we're going for in this. But what it also makes us do is it makes us modulate within the subject. So, we're still going dominant tonic, but essentially we almost treat our main idea, our basic idea that of the subject as a harmonic sequence, right? That goes down a major third. So it is quite chromatic within our chunks, if you will, of the fugue. I want to reiterate that the way that I wrote this was I decided I wanted my counter subject to be this descending chromatic scale, and then I set the text in such a way that facilitated that, right? So I decided my harmonies before I came up with my melody, and then that is what enabled me to have this descending chromatic bass line whilst also keeping it invertible with the subject. And then the altos come in with the subject returning, right? So the tenors, we're doing this almost like sort of double fugue here, where the tenors are going to have that descending chromatic line and the basses are going to introduce a new idea. Right? And all of this is doubled down here in the orchestra. So as much as, a vocal fugue can sound intimidating here, the orchestra's really doubling up everything that's happening. It's going to make those entries clearer, and it's also going to make it more confident for them, right? If you're singing something contrapuntal and you can hear that, okay, I'm the singing bass and the double bass is also doing what I'm doing, it can make it a bit easier on the singers. Not that this is overly difficult to sing. As far as contrapuntal music goes, this is actually fairly straightforward. One of the things that I think is also pretty important to note here is that, we have a pretty square rhythm in the counter subject, so it's pretty important, I think. It was important to me to introduce a third idea that was going to be a bit syncopated here, right? So you can see down here in the basses, we've got a different piece of text that has a bit of a feminine ending here, and then syncopated entrance happening as a third idea, which I think it can sound very boring if you don't have those sorts of syncopations. But also on the flip side of that, you can easily over-egg that pudding. So for our final entrance here, we've got the sopranos coming in with the second answer. The basses are kind of keeping up that same sort of idea that they had during the second answer. But we're continuing on with moving our counter subject up, as the subject goes up. So really there's kind of a fugal thing going on here with the counter subject as well. And then so the tenors are the ones here coming in with the new material. As you can see down here in the string section, they're going to continue to double all of those choral parts, and we have the cellos and the basses now moving together. Now that we're done the fugal exposition, instead of going on with a development where this is sort of an introduction almost into the Dies Irae, I didn't want to get too carried away with this movement, right? There's only one piece of text. I felt like it was better to keep building and keep moving rather than to go and really try to do something with this movement. So what we have here is we've got them singing in unison in the choir, right? And they're really they're just singing the subject, and they're hitting it home. They're gonna be singing their guts out here. And what we've got coming in here, really the moment in this movement is when the organ comes in. We've got the organ coming in with basically just playing the fugue, playing what the choir was singing on the other side of the page, right? So we've got this descending chromatic thing happening in the pedals, the subject happening in the soprano, and then the inner voice is playing what the tenors had, what the basses had over the page here. If you can see that sort of syncopated thing happening, that's going to happen over here in the left hand, and then the right hand is going to take the subject as well as what the tenors were singing on the other side. So, we're getting lots of text, lots of volume, and we're getting that ripping organ sound to really kind of, I guess, be our dramatic moment. And then they repeat that idea twice, and we end off here on a plagal cadence. So it's going to sound dark, it's going to sound church music, and it's also not going to sound final, because we are almost leading right in with an attacca into the next movement, into the Dies Irae. All right, so that was Premum Regnum Dei Querite. I hope you enjoyed the piece. I think the AI demo of this was decently convincing. Obviously, it's not as good as if a real choir did it, but I think it was a perfectly accurate depiction of this piece, which is always good for facilitating this sort of discussion about my compositional work. I hope you enjoyed the discussion and learned something about contrapuntal vocal writing. And if you did, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and stay tuned for the Dies Irae in the next video of this Requiem series.